From what I can tell, Boruto TBV Vortex Chapter 22 seems to be pretty controversial. Some are getting sick of the current story, while others thought this chapter was the best thing ever. But even more so, people seem to heavily disagree about a lot of specific plot points, such as how Jura undid Uzuhiko, who else might be able to do the same, how strong Boruto really is, how he would do against a full-powered Matsuri, Sarada versus Boruto, why Jura didn't bring the other Shinju with him to retrieve Ryu and Matsuri's thorn souls, what Konohamaru was going to say, and so on. And so, I want to walk through this chapter and discuss some possible answers to these questions, present some questions of my own, go over some of the narrative elements that I really liked, and present the overarching problem this chapter faces. This will be a little different from past reviews, so if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like to show your support, and I might start reviewing the chapters more regularly again. Going in chronological order, first up is probably not what you expect, but how and why was that piece of metal Mitsuki found just floating in the air for Boruto to teleport to? In chapter 17, Mitsuki found a piece of metal when Team 7 and the Shinju first met, then either kept it in his pocket or put it back on the ground. But then in chapter 21, that same piece of metal with the exact same shape was just floating in the air next to Boruto when he appeared for seemingly no reason. Why wasn't it on the ground? We know Mitsuki didn't throw it there because not only is he still with Araya, he didn't even know Boruto was there. Did Boruto teleport to a random location wherever the piece of metal was, then throw the metal in the air, then teleport to it, then throw a shuriken at Matsuri, then teleport to Matsuri? Problem is, the pendant has no speed lights indicating that it was being thrown, therefore it probably wasn't, not to mention how goofy this sounds. So why wasn't it on the ground? It doesn't make any sense, but luckily, it doesn't actually matter whether it's in the air or on the ground. It's just weird that it's in the air. Up next we have the Boruto vs Matsuri discussion. I debated this on my podcast myself last chapter, but I was of the stance that Boruto can only destroy her so quickly and so easily because Matsuri was off guard and already heavily wounded. And sure enough, Boruto himself makes it crystal clear that it wouldn't have been so easy if she wasn't so beat up. Not to mention she was in the middle of trying to devour Konohamaru when Boruto blindsided her with a flying Raijin shuriken. This is further supported by the fact that Boruto relied on backup from Sarada and Konohamaru against Hidari. He never asked them to stay out of the fight, and he never gained the advantage against Hidari or Momoshiki in their brief 1v1 encounters before everyone teamed up on him. So unless Hidari is just massively stronger than Matsuri and Ryu, Boruto might just be extremely even with each Shinju 1v1. That doesn't mean he can't beat them 1v1 eventually, especially with his superior skills and tactics, but it might be a really close battle. That said, Sarada did defeat Ryu pretty handily, which at first glance makes it seem as though Sarada has surpassed Boruto. However, the narrative seems to be indicating that Boruto is the strongest in Konoha, aside from Daemon, based on Koji's very clear insistence on Boruto being absolutely necessary in order to stop the Shinju, the fact that Boruto did one-shot Matsuri so quickly and effortlessly, even when compared to Sarada and Ryu, the fact that Boruto is the one facing off against Jura now, the fact that Jura only wants Boruto dead even though Sarada also knows about the soul thorns and body to Shinju, and the fact that Sarada's probably not gonna just body Hidari no problem the next time they fight. Otherwise, what's the point in Hidari as an antagonist for Sarada? This collectively implies that Boruto is still the strongest, which either means Ryu is the weakest Shinju, or Sarada's Mangekyo Sharingan abilities specifically counter Ryu more than they would the other Shinju, but it's hard to say for sure right now. Continuing with the chapter though, this is another weird question that doesn't actually matter all that much, but how do the soul thorns even work? Where do they even come from and what are they made of? I understand all the dust particles coming together in Hidari and Ryu's case since they were literally blown up, but Matsuri was just chopped into pieces. Why does the thorn soul need to reconstitute from particles? Why aren't there just big chunks of the thorn soul lying on the ground? Are the thorn souls inside the Shinju normally, sort of like an organ? Or do the thorn souls only form when they're outside of the Shinju's body, or if the body is destroyed? If it's the latter, was Ryu's thorn soul in chapter 18 just a prop made of iron sand after all? That's what I want to be true, but is it actually the case? Based on Ryu's birth and Hidari's revival, the divine tree either seems to form the Shinju's body around the thorn souls, or it transforms the thorn soul into the Shinju's body. The puff of smoke that appears around Hidari and Ryu's bodies is very reminiscent of the transformation jutsu, and doesn't seem to be present when Hidari regenerates himself with the divine tree, which could indicate that the divine tree is doing two different things in each instance, otherwise it's just visually inconsistent. In addition, since Hidari and Ryu's bodies return to dust, those dust particles reconstituting into a thorn soul largely coincides with the previous theory, that the soul thorns are transformed into the Shinju's bodies by the divine tree. In other words, they are one and the same. However, Matsuri's thorn soul formation seems to throw a wrench into this theory, because she wasn't blown to ash, yet we see dust particles accumulate together to form her thorn soul, just like with Hidari and Ryu. Now you could argue that her chopped up body just kind of disintegrated into dust, then reconstituted itself into a thorn soul, since the panels emphasize Matsuri's chopped up body right before this happened, and we never get a clear image of Matsuri's body afterwards. But on page 10, it looks like Matsuri's chopped up body is still on the ground behind Boruto, which would disprove the theory I just gave. So all in all, I have no idea what's up with the thorn souls. Let's talk about Konohamaru next. I'm sure a lot of people were probably punching air when Konohamaru just stood there being confused instead of listening to Boruto and running away, but that actually leads into the main question. What was Konohamaru about to say to Boruto before he was cut off? I've seen a few answers online, such as, "You've changed," but I disagree with that answer and anything similar to it, because Konohamaru has already noticed Boruto's seemingly different demeanor towards everyone and his clear devotion towards protecting the village and its friends, and Konohamaru has slowly come around to Boruto little by little throughout Two Blue Vortex, so it seems a bit strange to say this now of all times. So instead, I think it's more than likely one of two things. Either you've been watching us, haven't you? Or you've been working with Lord 8, haven't you? Essentially, Konohamaru has figured out that Boruto knows all about this current mission, and the only way that's possible is if Boruto is spying on them or working with Shikamaru. But based on his earlier questioning about how Boruto escaped his handcuffs in chapter 14 and who Shikamaru's intel source was in chapter 16, I'm inclined to believe he figured out that Boruto has been working with Shikamaru behind the scenes. I'm very interested to see where this leads, as Ino has stopped helping Shikamaru out, the elders were mad at him for causing Boruto's escape in chapter 14, and Konohamaru seems to realize Shikamaru and Boruto are working together now. In other words, Shikamaru is in really hot water, and if he gets fired as Hokage, who will become the next Hokage? This could lead to a number of interesting plot points, many of which I find intriguing. Moving on to my favorite part of the chapter, I really like the dialogue between Boruto and Jura. Boruto's appearance in this arc to save his friends further validates Jura's beliefs about love, and this is further exacerbated within the fight itself later on, and I really like Jura's line, "Take you, for example. I suspect you know how minuscule your chance of winning against me is, and yet you still came here to save your friends. In other words, love has lured you here to your place of death." That's a great depiction of Jura's mindset. Love leads to the disruption of evolution. It leads to death. Technically, this isn't anything new, but I really like the way Jura said it here compared to other times with Inojin. You could definitely critique the excessive repetition of this idea, but at least he said it in a more impactful way this time. Personally, I wouldn't change anything here. If anything, I'd remove or change the earlier lines about Inojin in Team 10, but even that's not really necessary. Now, one of the reasons I think this line works so well is because of how it leads into the next scene I really liked, which is when Jura traps Boruto in a wood restraint and does the Jigen walk towards Sasuke's sword, which looks just like when Jigen walked towards Naruto and Sasuke after piercing them with all those rods. And then Boruto starts to freak out more than ever before in Two Blue Vortex so far, exclaiming that that sword is a precious gift he borrowed from his master, and threatens to make Jura face a fate worse than death if he does anything to it. However, this only further validates Jura, leading to his next move. He picks up the sword and says, "I see, so yet again, you shall come to suffer thanks to love." How about this? Simply tell me where your accomplice is, and this blade can retain its original form. This scene reminds me a lot of great Naruto and Boruto scenes, like when Madara recited Hashirama's words as he stabbed Sasuke with his own sword, Deepa asking Umoe's squad to tell him where the Hashirama cell was in exchange for sparing Umoe's life, Jigen threatening to nuke the village in the anime if Kawaki doesn't come with him, Ishiki threatening to destroy the village if Naruto doesn't bring Kawaki to him, Ishiki's countdown to Kawaki. Damn, there really is a lot of these Jigen and Ishiki scenes, aren't there? That's not even the only Jigen parallel. Jura also mentioned the very same bad habit of having fun and getting carried away that Jigen mentioned to Amado in chapter 39. Guess I oughta finish that Jura identity video already, shouldn't I? In any case, while I don't exactly agree with Boruto's words, I did really like his response. You might be right about love being a flaw and a weakness of us humans, but, and this is my opinion, that's precisely why you will never be more than just trees. This was a really good scene, and I think this was a very impactful and in-character response for Boruto to give towards Jura's earlier remarks. It reminded me of Naruto taking his headband back from Zabuza in the Land of Waves. However, I do think he is wrong. Aside from the fact that the Shinju are divine trees rather than normal trees, the Shinju clearly have the capacity for love. Matsuri is proof of this, and Jura literally won't destroy the Leaf Village because he loves the bookstore that much. They are more than just trees. However, their humanity and instincts as a divine tree are diametrically at odds with each other. This is shown beautifully again through Matsuri. Her humanity desires Konohamaru, while her instincts as a divine tree tell her to eliminate the danger that he poses. This whole dilemma reminds me a lot of Netero's thoughts about Meruem during the Chimera Ant arc in Hunter x Hunter. At the time of Netero and Meruem's battle, Netero points out that Meruem's human and ant sides were about 50-50, but that wouldn't be enough to satisfy humans. They demanded that the ants be entirely human or be entirely erased. Boruto has a similar mindset, though he also wants to restore everyone who was turned into a tree, which wasn't an option with the Chimera ants. Ignoring that aspect though, if the Shinju are anything like the Chimera ants, which spoiler alert, they are, then some Shinju could theoretically lean towards their human side the same way Colt, Ikalgo, Melioron, Welfin, Hina, Reina, and Meruem did. With that in mind, especially in light of Boruto's knowledge of Matsuri and Jura through Koji, I do have to wonder how much of this is Boruto's genuine belief, and how much of this is Boruto trying to convince himself to prevent his heart from wavering, the same way Netero chose to fight and kill Meruem before his heart could be swayed. In any case, I think this is pretty good stuff, and I'd like to do a video discussing this further. I know I made a lot of Shinju analysis videos lately, but that is the primary storyline. If you don't find it interesting, then you don't like Boruto TBV Vortex. I'll do several other theory and explanations videos before coming back to this though. In any case, let's talk about Jura undoing the Uzuhiko. I'll do a video covering this topic in more detail, but giving the chapter the benefit of the doubt, Jura said the Uzuhiko is similar to his Biju bombs, not all Biju bombs. Fundamentally, there are no similarities between the Uzuhiko and a regular Tail Beast Bomb. A regular Tail Beast Bomb doesn't use rotation or the planet's chakra, and the Uzuhiko doesn't form the shape of a ball, it doesn't use a specific ratio of black and white Tail Beast chakra, or any Tail Beast chakra at all for that matter, and we don't even know if it uses compression at all because it doesn't look very compressed with all the swirls floating around at a far distance. They are as similar as literally every other jutsu. So this doesn't mean that anyone with the Biju Bomb can necessarily undo the Uzuhiko. Chances are they can't, since the jutsu have nothing in common. Similarly, someone who can use the Rasengan isn't necessarily able to do what Jura did either. It may very well just be Jura, but I'll go through all the scenarios in that upcoming video. The cool part about this though, is that if it is only Jura who can do this, that means Jura's Biju Bomb and other potential abilities are way more intricate than we may have initially thought, which is what I personally hope to be the case. And finally, let's get into the overarching problem this chapter faces. As I mentioned in my previous video before the chapter, we were likely going to run into this problem. Jura was either going to take Matsuri and Ryu's thorn souls and leave, leaving us with another anticlimactic arc finale, or he was going to ignore Matsuri and Ryu's thorn souls to focus on killing Boruto, which makes his decision to leave without killing Boruto in chapter 13 extremely inconsistent. Now, to be abundantly clear, between the two options, this was by far the better one. The problem isn't so much about this chapter as it is with chapter 13. This is a topic I've been sitting on for a while now, but Jura's excuse of Hidari rotting was not only completely absurd, but it's entirely invalidated by this chapter. Not only is Jura completely unbothered by Ryu and Matsuri's thorn souls floating around in plain sight, according to Kashi and Koji, if Boruto fled right now, several minutes after the thorn souls were first exposed, Jura would retrieve them and everything would be just fine and dandy. They wouldn't rot. So Hidari's thorn soul wouldn't have rotted in chapter 13, given that it would have only taken another split second to snipe Boruto again. Not to mention Momoshiki was there to either bring Hidari back home or finish Boruto off for Jura. Similarly, their foe being formidable doesn't work as an excuse either, since Jura seems perfectly aware that he could solo everyone in the village, aside from maybe Damon, so he clearly wasn't afraid for his life against a half-dead Boruto. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the narrative of Jura not actually wanting to kill Boruto deep down, which is what I believe to be the case, since it explains 99% of Jura's actions, but you gotta make it reasonable. Jura didn't spare Boruto because he realized he needed Boruto to find Kashi and Koji. Matsuri's troops have done far more than Boruto ever did. Jura didn't consciously decide that Boruto no longer needs to die since the accomplice is the true threat. This chapter made that abundantly clear. He didn't spare Boruto because he was scared they would all die against the half-dead Boruto lying on the ground, and I don't care what nonsense you want to say about divine intervention. The only intervention was Jura himself. He could have sniped Boruto again, but he chose not to. I'm fine with them making excuses if they're reasonable, and I'm even fine with them making borderline lies for excuses as long as another Shinju at least calls him out for it. I'm honestly surprised that Momoshiki didn't call him out on it, since he seems to do so every time Jura talks about humanity or does anything else he finds strange like wanting to devour Naruto. But so far, none of this has happened, and it's probably the biggest blunder of Two Blue Vortex. I have a lot more to say about this topic, but I'd rather keep it at that for now. I want that other video to be much more thoughtful and detailed to best explain the concept, the dilemma, and how to alleviate it. Another really small complaint that you can easily write off as a nitpick is when Koji said Boruto couldn't teleport away even if he wanted to. In character, Boruto obviously wouldn't risk his friends' lives, but to say he couldn't teleport away is just false. Not only is Boruto literally teleported across dimensions, but he was ganged up on by Momoshiki, Hidari, and Matsuri, who were all trying to kill him and literally had him trapped inside Matsuri's jutsu. But he could have easily teleported over to Mitsuki if he had one of Boruto's metallic objects, or given one to Konohamaru and teleported to him once he got far enough away, then taken a second to focus so he could teleport back to Koji while Jura flew back over to Boruto's new location. Again, he wouldn't do this in character, but nothing was stopping this from working, and based on chapter 4, this roundabout strategy shouldn't even be necessary. So Koji's just wrong. Not that it really matters, since Boruto chose to come here for a reason. But despite all that, I really did enjoy this chapter, maybe more than a lot of other people. The second half of the chapter with Boruto and Jura's dialogue was really nice, and if Jura's Biju bombs are as intricate as I hope, then I think Jura undoing the Uzuhiko is really cool. As far as how Boruto is gonna get out of this situation, I'll do a separate video covering every option I can think of, the pros and cons of each option, and how likely I think they each are. That's it for my review though. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this chapter and each of the topics I discussed, and let me know if you like this question and answer style of review, in addition to the bigger narrative points I discussed at the end. I thought it was a nice change of pace for me, but let me know what you think too. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications for future videos, and if you think I'm completely wrong about everything, feel free to let me know in the comments. Either way, thanks for watching,